Hello, this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday here on June the 28th. So we're going to talk about an update on the crop progress. We're going to share with you some agronomic things to be thinking about. And also, I wanted to let you know, if you hadn't heard already, as we talked about on our podcast last week, tar spot has now been found in the state of Michigan. Branch County on Wednesday, it was found. And so if you'd like some more detailed information on that, make sure you jump back to last week's podcast where Dr. Marty Chilvers and I talked quite a bit about what to be doing if and when tar spot was found here in the state. I was actually kind of excited to hear that the Michigan Farm News, when they reported this, actually used quotes from this very podcast in their article there. So though we're not excited about tar spot being here in the state, it's good that we're aware of it. And now we can think about how we can manage that to continue to keep the best yields possible. We've been down this road before with heavy tar spot years, so we can work through this. Getting into the crop update, things are looking pretty good. That May 1st corn planted is up to 925 heat units, which is certainly above average for right now. Should be sitting about at that V11 growth stage. As far as moisture out there, boy, it's the haves and the have-nots right now. I've been in places where there's water between the rows and places where they could use a drink of water. So it's truly all over the board, but as a whole, the corn and the soybean crop just look good. And they got through that heat real well with the moisture they had. I do have some concerns with those areas that are sitting in the water and just too wet right now, because it's oftentimes we're going to start to see Phytophthora show up in those soybeans. And the way we know it's Phytophthora typically is you walk down that row and you'll see just scattered dead plants in amongst perfectly good live plants. And literally it's dead plant, live plant, live plant, dead plant, live plant, live plant, live plant, dead plant, right on down the row. And so if we think about the Phytophthora, unfortunately, seed treatment did its job. It got them to this height and growth and development stage, but that's going to run out by now. And so the only thing we've got left is that genetic trait or genetic field tolerance to Phytophthora to get those through the remainder of the season. So as we think about management by Phytophthora, we've done what we could for seed treatment. We can pick some varieties that are certainly better than others for the tolerance of Phytophthora. And then really long term, we need to think about how we can get that water moved out of those fields, get some tile in there and get those fields dried up to change out that environment. As far as agronomy calls, I haven't had one yet, but I'm truly expecting we are at the beginning epicenter of white mold in soybeans this year. So you think about what does it take to make just a really tough white mold year, and that is a lot of humidity and moisture during flowering, and that's what we're doing right now. And of course, it always goes back to the disease triangle, right? So, the three parts of disease triangle is you've got a susceptible host, you've got the disease present, and you've got an environment that's conducive for the disease to occur. And we like to break at least one of those legs to reduce our risk of that. If we think about that in the presence of white mold, of course, susceptible host, all soybeans have some susceptibility to white mold, but there are some that are very tolerant, but nothing that is resistant out there. So it'd be a good time to check back with your seed advisors out there to make sure that what is the risk level of the varieties you have planted for white mold, and then plan accordingly. Secondly is, that disease presence. So your own fields. The ones that, boy, when conditions are right, you're going to see white mold in those fields. And those are the ones we want to think about managing right now. So how do we manage those fields? The best tool in the toolbox right now is a fungicide application, but be careful there. Not all fungicides are created equal. There are some that are very specific for white mold and others that are just really good for plant growth and development. And so with that in mind, get a good fungicide out there and get those applied at this R1 growth stage. And of course, R1 being that time when our soybean plants are at least 50% of the plants are showing flowers out there. And so we're kind of getting to that stage, and some are maybe a little past that stage right now, but we're right in the middle of it. And of course, the other option is some folks will use a burner type chemistry out there and try to burn off some of those leaves and reduce that canopy. And of course, that kind of leads to that third leg of the triangle, that micro environment down there, because, if we can get more air in that canopy, more sunlight down through that canopy, we can help to reduce the amount of sclerotia that survives and infects the flowers on those plants, because that's all about protecting those flowers out there. Of course, the macro environment, the weather pattern we're in, we can't do much about that. But as we think about managing white mold, let's be aware that we're in a condition right now that we're at high risk and a good chance to possibly affect the outcome with some action right now. In addition to white mold, I'm thinking heavily about corn rootworm. And the reason for it is I've been getting all kinds of photos and texts from my colleagues, the agronomists out in Iowa and Illinois, where they are finding lots of feeding going on the roots of corn right now. So, what that means is, we talked last week about the fact that hatch is going on. And of course, after hatch, we get larvae, and larvae grow and they start feeding. And so if we're thinking about scouting for rootworm, so we're in a corn on corn situation, we're in a historically heavy corn rootworm area, what do we need to do? So basic scouting, you get about a 7-inch cube of soil dug from around the base of that plant there. And we're going to sample a minimum of 2 plants in each of 5 sites in a field. And we want to carefully search through that soil and those roots for the larvae. And so we can place the soil and the roots on a sheet of black plastic to make it easier to find those small white larvae or small white worms out there. Or, what I like to do is just take a 5-gallon bucket, fill with water, and then break that soil root ball apart inside that water there, stir it up real good. And then the rootworm larvae, they will float to the surface. Keep in mind, though, those larvae are going to get bigger as you go. So, when they get to that second and third instar stages, get into that 1/4 to 1/2 inch type length, they're a lot easier to see. And so what are you looking for? They're really kind of a creamy white color. They're narrow or slender in their width. But what's unique about them is they've got this brown head and they got this dark plate on the top side of their tail. So it almost gives them a double-headed appearance. So unfortunately, right now, there is no rescue treatment for corn rootworm, but it truly is an important time to know what those population levels out there, because we have to manage our harvest timing, because we're going to see some standability issues potentially when we get those roots fed off. And then, setting expectations for yield, because they just can't pull up those nutrients in that water when our roots have been fed off in these situations. And finally, it's going to help us for planning for next year, whether we need to use more soil applied insecticides or beetle bombing or other things to manage those populations of rootworm out in our fields. Finally, the last thing, just a quick reminder, as these soybeans are hitting that R1 growth stage, R2 growth stage, think about the different herbicides we can use out there. We are getting to those cutoff periods. So please take the time to check your labels and what you're spraying out there. We don't want to burn off any more flowers than we have to protect that yield out there. And I know there's always that balance between yield and weed control out there, but at the end of the day, we need to follow those labels and make sure that we're being good stewards of our technologies out there. So a lot of agronomy this week, and I really appreciate your listening. And if you got any questions, always send them out my way. And if not, we'll look forward to catching up with you next week. Again, this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist, with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday. Have a great weekend.